The woods behind my house always felt wrong. Even as a kid, I knew something wasn't right about them. But I never thought I'd find out what was hiding in there until last October. I was 19, home from college for the weekend. My parents had gone to visit my aunt in the next town over, so I had the house to myself. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard the first sound, a low thumping noise coming from somewhere outside. At first, I thought maybe it was the neighbor's dog getting into our trash again. So I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the back porch. The thumping had stopped, but now I could hear something else. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy through the leaves. The sound was coming from the tree line about 50 yards behind our house. I called out thinking maybe someone was hurt or needed help. "Hey, you okay out there?" The dragging sound stopped immediately. Then I heard footsteps. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were too slow, too deliberate, like someone was carefully placing each foot before taking the next step. I should have gone back inside. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to lock the door and call the police. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the woods, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead of me. As I got closer to the tree line, I started to smell something awful. It was sweet and rotten, like meat that had been left out in the sun for days. The smell got stronger with each step I took. Then I saw the trees, 3 of them in a row, each about 6 feet apart, and hanging from the lowest branch of each tree was what looked like animal carcasses. Deer, I think, but they'd been arranged somehow. Their legs were tied together with rope, and they were all facing the same direction. I backed away slowly, trying not to make any noise, but as I turned to head back to the house, my flashlight caught something moving between the trees. A person, tall and thin, wearing what looked like dark clothes. They were standing perfectly still, watching me. I ran. I don't care how that sounds. I dropped the flashlight and ran as fast as I could back to the house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then went around checking every window and door to make sure they were all secure. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever was out there was gone. The hanging deer were still there, though. The officers took pictures and asked me a bunch of questions, but they couldn't tell me much. They said it looked like some kind of hunting ritual, probably just someone playing a prank. But I know what I saw. That person in the woods wasn't playing a prank. They were waiting for something. Or someone. I never went back into those woods again. And 3 weeks later, when I heard on the news that a hiker had gone missing just 2 miles from our house, I had a feeling I knew where they might find him. They never did. The night shift at the gas station was supposed to be easy money. 3 nights a week, midnight to 6 a.m., mostly just sitting behind the counter reading or playing on my phone. The store was on a quiet stretch of highway outside town, so we rarely got customers after 2 a.m. I'd been working there for about 2 months when I started noticing the pattern. Every Tuesday night around 3:15 a.m., the same car would pull up, a beat-up brown sedan with tinted windows. The driver would pump gas, pay with cash, and leave without saying a word. At first, I didn't think much of it. People work weird schedules. Maybe this guy was a trucker or worked at the hospital in the next county. But something about him bothered me. He always wore the same baseball cap pulled low over his face, and he never looked directly at me when he paid. The 4th time he came in, I decided to try making conversation. When he walked up to the counter with a $20 bill, I smiled and said, "Working late tonight?" He stopped and looked at me for the first time. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and he had this strange smile that didn't reach his eyes at all. "Something like that," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Then he leaned closer to the counter and said, "You're here alone a lot, aren't you?" Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. I tried to act casual, but my heart was pounding. "Yeah, well, someone's got to work the night shift, right?" He nodded slowly, still smiling that creepy smile. "Must get lonely." Then he turned and walked out without another word. I watched through the window as he got in his car and drove away. I wrote down his license plate number, but when I tried to report it to my manager the next day, he just shrugged it off. Said the guy was probably harmless, just awkward. The next Tuesday night, I made sure to lock the door right at 3 a.m. When the brown sedan pulled up at 3:15, I pretended to be busy with inventory in the back room. I could hear him trying the door handle, then knocking on the glass. After a few minutes, he gave up and left. I thought that would be the end of it, but the following Tuesday he came back. This time he didn't even bother with the gas pumps. He just parked right in front of the door and sat there for almost an hour. I could see him watching me through the window, but I couldn't make out his face because of the tinted glass. At 4:20 a.m., he finally started his engine and drove away. But as he was leaving, he rolled down his window and waved at me. That same creepy smile on his face. I quit the next day. Told my manager I'd found a better job. Didn't mention the weird customer. But about a week later, I saw on the local news that there had been a break-in at the gas station. Someone had smashed the front window and stolen money from the register. The security footage showed a man in a baseball cap. The police said they were looking for someone driving a brown sedan. I never told anyone what I knew. Part of me wonders if I should have. But mostly I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and got out of there when I did. My roommate Sarah had always been a heavy sleeper. In the 2 years we'd lived together, I'd never known anything to wake her up. Not thunderstorms, not car alarms, not even the time the upstairs neighbors had a screaming fight at 3 a.m. So when she started sleepwalking, I figured it was just stress from finals week. College does weird things to people. The first time it happened, I found her standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the refrigerator. When I called her name, she turned around and walked back to her room like nothing had happened. The second time she was in the living room, just standing by the window looking out at the street. Again, when I spoke to her, she went right back to bed. I mentioned it to her the next morning, but she had no memory of it. She seemed genuinely confused and a little embarrassed. We looked it up online and found out that sleepwalking is pretty common in college students, especially during stressful periods, but then it started happening every night, and the episodes were getting longer. I'd wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway and find Sarah wandering around the apartment. Sometimes she'd be in the kitchen, sometimes the living room, sometimes just standing in the middle of the hallway. She never responded when I called her name anymore, and it was getting harder to guide her back to bed. The worst part was her face. When she was sleepwalking, her expression was completely blank. No emotion, no recognition. It was like looking at a stranger wearing Sarah's face. After about a week of this, I decided to stay up and watch her more closely. I wanted to see exactly what she was doing during these episodes. Maybe if I understood the pattern, I could help her somehow. So on Friday night, I pretended to go to sleep but kept my bedroom door cracked open so I could see into the hallway. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard Sarah's door open. I watched as she walked out of her room, but instead of wandering around like usual, she went straight to the front door. She stood there for a few minutes, then reached for the deadbolt. I jumped out of bed and grabbed her arm just as she was about to unlock it. "Sarah, wake up," I whispered, trying not to startle her too much. But she didn't respond. She kept trying to unlock the door, even with me holding her arm. I had to physically pull her away from the door and guide her back to her room. She fought me the whole way, not violently, but with this determined strength that was completely unlike her normal personality. The next morning, I told her what had happened. She was horrified. She made me promise to wake her up if she tried to leave the apartment again. But when it happened the next night, she wouldn't wake up. I shook her, called her name, even turned on all the lights. Nothing worked. She just kept trying to get to that front door. On the third night, I decided to follow her instead of stopping her. I wanted to see where she was trying to go. So when she got up and went to the front door, I let her unlock it and step outside. She walked down the hallway to the stairwell, then down 2 flights of stairs to the first floor. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding. When she got to the lobby, she walked straight to the main entrance and pushed the door open. Outside, she turned left and started walking down the sidewalk. It was almost 2 a.m., and the street was completely empty. I stayed about 20 feet behind her, ready to intervene if a car came or if she tried to walk into traffic. She walked for 6 blocks, never hesitating, never changing direction. It was like she knew exactly where she was going. Finally, she stopped in front of a small white house with a chain-link fence around the front yard. She stood at the gate for several minutes, then turned around and walked home. The whole trip took about 40 minutes, and she never once seemed aware that I was following her. When we got back to the apartment, she went straight to her room and got back into bed. The next day, I decided to check out the house she'd walked to. I found it easily. It was the same white house with the chain-link fence. But when I asked the neighbors about it, they told me something that made my blood run cold. The house had been empty for 3 years. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Chen, had died in her sleep. She'd had no family, and the house had been tied up in legal proceedings ever since. But here's the part that really scared me. Margaret Chen looked almost exactly like Sarah. Same height, same build, same dark hair. The neighbor showed me an old photo, and the resemblance was uncanny. I never told Sarah about the house or its previous owner, but I did convince her to see a doctor about the sleepwalking. They prescribed some medication that seemed to help, and the episodes gradually stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch her standing by the window in the living room. She's awake when it happens now, and she always has a good explanation. Couldn't sleep, heard a noise outside, just looking at the stars. But she's always looking in the same direction, toward that little white house 6 blocks away.